This is The Speaking Show. I'm David Newman, and you're tuned in to the #1 podcast for speakers, consultants, and experts who want to speak more profitably. Here he is, the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Steven Shapiro. CSP, CPAE, all the C's, all the P's, all the E's. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. So we're going to roll up our sleeves. We're going to go behind the scenes of the Steven Shapiro empire. And what people might not know is that you and I have known each other for 16 years, 17 years?
It was 2003 is when we first met in Philadelphia.
There you go. And you were just rocketing all over. We met through the Fast Company of Friends initially, I think. This was way before I even knew what the hell the National Speakers Association was. I was much more involved in the ASTD, now ATD, because I was more of a trainer at that time. And then this guy, Steven Shapiro, comes in, 24/7 innovation, Mr. Fancy rock star, speaker, consultant guy. And we struck up a little bit of a conversation, a little bit of a friendship started to develop. And here we are 16 plus years later. So innovation is your thing. How did that become your thing? What was your journey that brought you to that topic?
So right out of college, I started my life at Accenture. I was a management consultant. And what I ended up doing in my early days was I was focused on business optimization work, which is called business process reengineering. So what we did was we went into companies and we made them more efficient. And one of the things which I discovered was that if we optimize a company's processes, they will downsize their workforce. And I just woke up one day and realized literally tens of thousands of people were losing their jobs because of the work I was promoting. And I just had a bit of an existential meltdown and realized I don't want to do that. I want to help companies, but I want to help them grow. I want to create jobs. I want to create wealth. And that's when I started to get involved in innovation, which was in 1995, which is long before people used the word innovation.
So you were like George Clooney, right, in that movie Up in the Air?
Fortunately, I wasn't the person who actually sat across the table and told them that they lost their job, but the work I did kept George Clooney in business doing what he did.
There you go. There you go. Now, you had some really cool clients back in the day, because I remember, and this is still part of your bio and part of your awesomeness, you worked with BMW, and who else was some of the big names when you were at Accenture?
Oh, when I was at Accenture, geez, so many over the years, it's hard to remember. I remember we did a multi-year work with UPS, which was pretty cool. I lived in Europe, so I did a lot of work overseas. I worked for a Formula One race car team, which was sort of a cool thing to be involved with. So I've had my chance to work with some pretty big name companies, but to me, the cooler thing is it's across all different industries. So I've not worked in any particular industry. I've not focused in any particular industry. I found that the concept of innovation is transferable across all industries.
So that's really interesting. I want to come back to that because, of course, that's the classic one-size-fits-all advice that everyone has to have a niche. Everyone has to have an industry that they dominate. And, being in a vortex of conflicted advice, of course, that works for some people and it totally doesn't apply and doesn't work for others. Now, when you left Accenture, what was the year? Do you remember?
I left 2001 because my first book had come out at that point and I knew I wanted to be a speaker.
So there's another object lesson. If you're an executive listening to this, you wrote the book while you still had the big company job.
I did. Absolutely.
What was the impetus for that? What made you think that was a good idea? Were you concerned that the higher ups at Accenture might frown on, hey, why is this young pup writing a book? What's going on? What were the decision points in writing a book while still on the inside?
Actually, it's exactly the opposite. So at the time, I was leading a 20,000 person practice, which was great. And we wanted a way of raising the visibility of the firm and in particular, our work around innovation. So we thought, hey, why not do a book deal? So the company supported it. The company brought in an editor. The company connected me with McGraw-Hill. The company brokered the book deal. So they were all behind it. And then the book came out. And the day the book came out was the day I left the company and started to do my own thing.
And they didn't see this coming in any way, shape, or form.
I think they did. I mean, we came up with a nice arrangement. And I mean, I think it worked out for everybody. I think, which is the key thing is, my goal was certainly to help promote the company. I love Accenture. I think it's a fantastic company, and I always do anything and everything I can to promote the great work they do, even though I've been away from them for now 20 years.
Hey, good looking. Are you currently getting paid to speak? Would you like to ramp that up? We can help. Book a confidential speaker strategy call with our team at doitmarketing.com/call, and let's see what we might do together. The call is free, but the results may be priceless. So let's talk about this, because I'm always fascinated about the executive thought leader, right? The person who's in a company leading a 20,000 person group, big CEO, big executive VP. When you were at Accenture, were you already speaking on behalf of the company? Were you already doing conferences and big global meetings wearing your Accenture hat?
I was. 1993 is when I really started to do that. That's when I was involved in the optimization, the business process reengineering work. Those were more smaller workshops and more client workshops for consultants and clients. But then when we launched the innovation practice in 1996 is when we really started to get traction. I gave, I think, one year like 100 speeches, internally, externally, big industry conferences. And again, the goal was just to promote the company, promote our capabilities, make people aware internally and externally about all the really cool things that we can do that aren't just about slamming in computer systems, but we can actually help companies grow.
Right. Now, were some of those gigs paid, or as an executive, sort of the assumption is, oh, he doesn't need to be paid, he's a bigwig over at Accenture?
No, I never got paid for any of that, which was fine. I mean, I loved the work. It was what I actually wanted to do. What was really cool is in 1996, when we were launching this big practice, I got to work with a guy by the name of Michael Hammer. And Michael Hammer at the time was sort of he was the father of business process reengineering. He had the second best-selling business book in history at the time and was one of Time Magazine's 25 most influential people in the world. And so I got to work with him, got to know him, and I saw what he did. He gave speeches, he wrote books, he was a thought leader, he traveled around. And in 1996, in my mind, I actually found the journal where I wrote this. I said, in 5 years, I want to be the Michael Hammer of the next wave. 5 years, almost to the day. It's like 1 week off from when I wrote it. 5 years, almost to the day. My first book came out. I left Accenture. I became a speaker, traveling the world. Not quite the same level of celebrity that Hammer has achieved, but I feel quite pleased with what I've accomplished.
Wow. And, let's put this in context. Not yet.
Not yet.
Not
yes.
yet. Who knows? Next year, the next book, 2 years from now, huge, mega star, far eclipsing this Michael Hammer clown. Well, so what was the difference? Because I know that a lot of executives who leave a nice big corporate job, they've got the nice business card. The business card has the Accenture logo on it. Now suddenly you're Steve Shapiro, formerly of Accenture, no longer have the brand behind you on the business card. Was that a rude awakening, or were things fairly smooth in that transition? And how were you able to get some early traction as the speaker, thought leader, author?
So rude awakening, absolutely. First 2-3 years, I had no clue what I was doing in terms of the business. The other rude awakening was, when I left, I thought I was a great speaker. But I was a great speaker relative to other executive speakers, not a great speaker relative to professional speakers. And so I really had to up my game there. So there's just a lot of learning that I had to do in those early days. And back in 2001, we didn't have all the tools and access to people and Zoom and all the other things that we have today where you can connect with people. I was sort of trying to figure it out on my own, and it took me a little while.
Yeah, how about that? Well, first of all, tell me why it was a rude awakening. What aspects of that were like, whoa, I thought this would be easier?
Well, I think I assumed because I thought I was a good speaker that I would just get booked. And one of the things which I just figured out very quickly, and I know you deal with this all the time with your clients, is they're not just going to come to you because I have a book on a bookshelf. My first book came out with McGraw-Hill, and I thought, the phone's going to be ringing. No. Now, fortunately, there was one client who read the book, loved the book, and basically promoted me to every single division of the company. And that ended up being a really big client of mine for a while. So I was able to basically get a couple of clients who got interested in the book and got interested in me. But my business is a little different now. And it's taken me a long time to get to the level where I am in terms of having enough variety of companies and not relying just on one company for everything.
Right. Now, in the early days, and we'll catch up to the current day, but it's always fascinating to kind of dig into like what was going on back in the early days. Were you purely keynoting, or were you also doing consulting and coaching? And obviously you had the book as a product. Were there other products in the mix? What was in your investable opportunity menu?
I mean, at that point, I didn't know what I was doing. So I would do whatever it was that would make money. I wasn't doing much keynoting. I have to say most of my work was probably more workshops and a little bit of consulting. In fact, I would go back and work with some of my past clients in consulting roles. And so in the beginning, I just did anything and everything I could to make a living and hoping that at some point I'd figure out how to crack the code in terms of getting gigs.
But luckily, and to give you credit, which I totally was not in this category, you always stuck to the knitting. You always were innovation, 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 and you never really veered off of that either opportunistically or out of desperation, correct?
I did veer once, and it hurt me. It was interesting because I thought it would actually help me a lot. So you and I met in 2003 when I was traveling around the country interviewing people for my second book. And originally the book was going to be on creativity at a personal level, and it ended up becoming something slightly different. It was a book called Goal-Free Living, which is on how to live a life without goals. Now I thought, hey, this is a really cool book. It's sort of pseudo self-help, I guess you could call it. It was on the cover of O magazine. I thought this is going to be the book that's going to make my name. And it actually hurt my business. Because what happened was corporate executives who were looking to hire an innovation expert saw now that I'm floating around talking about not having goals. They're like, okay, seems a little risky. We'll go elsewhere. And so I did see how, not sticking to your knitting and veering off your lane in that case definitely hurt me a little bit.
So let's talk about this book strategy. Sally Hogshead, buddy of ours, likes to say that writing a book is like steering a aircraft carrier. That an aircraft carrier is part of a naval battle group. Wherever the aircraft carrier goes, everybody follows. So when you're writing a book, your entire business is going to be going in that direction for the next 2-3 years. So this goal-free living, obviously you started speaking about it, getting interviews, being on the cover of O magazine, getting keynotes. How did you judge that, oh my gosh, I'm losing innovation work, and that was more of a loss than gaining in this pseudo-personal development world that could have been just a huge breakout book and a huge breakout platform for you?
I don't have all the data, but here's what I do know is the gigs I was getting booked for when I was doing goal-free living speeches were lower fees. They were tended to be smaller audiences. Now, maybe that's just because I didn't have a reputation in that space, and had I stuck it out longer, and people started giving me feedback. Like even my clients who were hiring me for innovation work, when they went to my website and they saw all this other stuff, they're like, do not mention goal-free living. Do not mention, anything like that from the stage. And so I really just started getting feedback from my core clients that that's the wrong direction. Now, maybe if I stuck it out, maybe if I took innovation off my website, maybe if I focused solely on goal-free living, maybe I would have moved in a different direction. But here's what I know is I know the corporate world. I'm a corporate guy from the day that I started working. I am not a personal development person. I am not a B2C person. I know businesses, but selling to consumers, to me, is a very different model. I can sell once to a big company. I don't know how to sell 1 million books.
Right. Let's talk about book number 3. After Goal-Free Living, what was the next one?
The next commercially published book was Personality Poker. I had a little self-published book in the middle, but Personality Poker was the next big book.
And I think that was just a huge hit. I mean, that took on a life of its own, but that didn't damage the innovation brand nearly as much as Goal-Free Living, or maybe even it helped, right?
Well, it was positioned as an innovation tool, and it is an innovation tool. So the book didn't help as much as the cards did. And the reason is the book was sort of a goofy design. It was a book with a deck of cards attached to it. So instead of the standard, height of a book, add an extra 3 inches, didn't fit in most bookshelves. Bookstores couldn't figure out where to put it. It was just a strange design. There's an example of being different isn't the same thing as being differentiated. It was different, didn't create value. But the cards are always about how do you get your team to be a high-performing innovation team. So it is consistent with innovation. I still do personality poker speeches, sell the personality poker cards separate from the deck. I love that. To me, that's one of the most fun things that I do is getting an opportunity to play cards with 500 people, 1,000 people in an audience.
Absolutely. Well, and that's one of the things that I also want to talk to you about, because on your website, it very clearly says experiential keynotes. And we know that in the meetings industry, you talk to any meeting planner, conference producer, the one way data dump, stage from the stage, keynote, straight talking for 45 minutes, that's done, that's over, stick a fork in it. People do want things to be experiential, interactive, a lot more participatory. And so your keynote hits all of those marks. How do you know how long to ride any of these ponies? So how do you know when it's time for a new book? How do you know when it's time for, just a pivot point in your business?
It's interesting. I wouldn't say I've had a lot of pivots. More, I've had divots.
That's fantastic.
Well, because if you think about it, a pivot is changing direction. A divot is just going down. So like my next book that's coming out is not new material. This is material I've been working on and perfecting for years now, but it's going deeper and deeper and deeper into just one sliver of my content. So I think if you have a broad enough topic and a timely enough topic, or at least an evergreen topic like innovation, I don't think there's any reason to ever do a major pivot from it. You may adjust it. You may go deeper into it. You may add some new pieces to it. But the next book is, to me, just taking material I've been working on for a long time and packaging up in a way that gives people a tool that they wouldn't have had access to otherwise.
Yeah, no, that's really, I love the divot versus the pivot. No, we're going deeper. We're peeling off another layer. We're going one level further down. What a great episode. Wowza. Tell you what, if you want to ramp up your revenue as an expert who speaks professionally, you should really check out our free online training at doitmarketing.com/webinar. Let's talk about this niche concept. I do want to get back to this because this is, I think, a source of both mythology and frustration. And, any sort of niche is going to be an artificial focusing tool. So if someone says, hey, I came out of the banking industry, I know the banking industry loves me, I've got connections, I've got relationships, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, that's where I've got the best names to drop, the best stories to tell, I'm going to focus on banking. Great, it's a focusing tool. When you don't have that focusing tool, how do you know where to publish, where to speak, where to build relationships, who to network with, how to get in front of the right buyers? I mean, obviously there's some decision-making targeting process that you're using that I work with this size company, or I work in these 5 areas because they're very hungry for innovation. I'm not sure if the plumbing industry, for example, is very hot on innovation because plumbing is plumbing. I could be wrong about that. But what is your artificial focusing tool that you use if it's not industry or traditional niche?
Well, what I try to do is I try to figure out what problems do I solve. And I try to figure out who has those problems and who's able to pay for those problems and who probably doesn't have access to the tools to solve them. So I find that my best clients are larger companies because the problems I solve are complex problems that big companies typically have. If you got 20,000 people, 50,000 people, collaborating in an organization of that size is sometimes difficult. So my tools help organizations of that size. Smaller companies, I think, benefit from what I do. They just typically, and they could actually benefit more in some respects because they don't have the resources. But I also know that given my price point and the tools that I currently have, it's sometimes out of reach, which is why I've been developing tools to get to different markets. So it's not so much that I'm, niching my content, I'm niching the delivery vehicle to match the market.
And Steve, am I right in thinking that there are going to be some evergreen industries? For example, I'm thinking the technology industry is 100% based on innovation, and their innovation speed is extremely rapid. They're under a tremendous amount of pressure to come out with the next app or the next tool or the next hardware, software platform, the next social media platform. Are you setting up camp, so to speak, in some of these innovation-heavy industries and then also kind of playing the field and seeing what comes? Because obviously other folks might need the same sort of tool set, but are there a couple of evergreen niches that you're always monitoring?
It's interesting. I would say almost the opposite in some respects. The companies that are hyper-focused on innovation and are putting a lot of money into innovation and have been thinking about innovation for a long time probably aren't typically my primary targets. I want the companies that recognize they need to innovate, that haven't been innovating, and they need to do something about it. Now, it could be about size, it could be about industry, but I find financial services feels as though they've been a little slow to innovate. So I think those companies are really good. But I mean, if I think about my speaking schedule coming up, I mean, it's across pretty much every industry. And that's, I think we sometimes make certain assumptions about our markets. And we assume that, well, Apple's an innovative company, we should work for Apple. No, Apple's probably the company that's not ever going to hire me because they've got so much resource already. For a guy like me, I don't have capacity to scale the way they might need. But when you get into the $2 billion, $5 billion, $10 billion, $50 billion revenue ranges, well, now we're talking about something that I can do, a lot of really positive work. So I think it really depends on way too many factors. And I just sort of play each, I look at each client from a different perspective because there's a different solution. I've got one client who really wants to hire me. They're in an industry that you would probably put ridiculously low on the innovation scale, yet they need it. So we're finding a creative way to allow them to be able to scale my content without it having all the cost of me doing everything for them. And that to me, again, it comes back to if somebody has a need and I can solve their problems, we'll come up with a creative solution to be able to do that financially or whatever.
That's a great idea, is to really flex that delivery mode to fit different clients, different situations, different budgets. Which brings me to productization, which you've always been great at. And even looking at the personality poker concept that you just shared about having a card deck, that's a version of productization. But you've also, I think you've done a great job productizing and partnering with other organizations, either in a licensing capacity or a distribution capacity. Tell us about some of those deals and how did those come about?
Sure. So one of my beliefs is, especially being a solopreneur like I am, I don't want to hire a lot of employees. I don't want to hire any employees. I want to partner with people. Now I could partner with people in a 1099 freelancer perspective, or I could partner people in a true type of partnership capacity. And that's really where I like to go as much as possible. There's an expression I once heard somebody tell me when I was speaking overseas. They said, before you can multiply, you must first learn to divide. And basically what they're saying is before you can grow your business, before you can multiply your business, you must figure out ways to divide it so that you have people who are interested in your success. So I have, for example, I was approached by an e-learning company that wanted to develop an e-learning course. I didn't have to pay them. Now, as you know, a lot of our colleagues have spent tens of thousands of dollars in building training courses. I spent zero. I spent almost no time doing it. I just made sure that what they developed was high quality, went into a studio for an hour and shot some videos, but they produced it, they created it, they deliver it, they host it, they sell it, and I get a royalty check. And I like those deals. And maybe percentage-wise, it's lower than someone else would get, but there was no risk on my part, and there was no energy on my part. I love those types of situations. So I have those types of arrangements whenever I possibly can.
Oh, let's talk about your course. The course / mentorship / group program. We call it Scalable Steve. How did you come to develop that? Where is that going? And where would you like it to go in the next year or two?
So I've developed something called innovation intervention. You have programs like this, and I look at people like you and say, hey, David's doing something really cool. I want to put my own spin on it. So that's really what it is. And it's an 8-week deep dive program into innovation. I've designed it to be as asynchronous as possible. So I know you have a lot of group and real-time things. Mine, I'm trying to be as asynchronous because of my travel schedule, and I want to take as few dates off the schedule as I can. So if it means working at 2 a.m, I work at 2 a.m. But I want to give people as much support as I possibly can. So that's a semi-scalable version of me. It's video-based, it's template-based, it's deliverable-based. And people go through this program, submit their deliverables to me. We, have an email chat about what's working, what's not working, and then they move to the next week. So it's sort of consulting in a box without me having to be there and without me having to actually schedule time.
Right. No, totally fantastic. Well, I've got 2 final questions for you as we're wrapping up here. The final question is, how do people get connected and stay connected to more Steve so they can keep tabs on all your movings about and the new book and new programs and all those kinds of fun things? But the second to last question is, if people were to look at our entire conversation today about business model innovation, how you grew the business, how you think about the business, the divots and the pivots, what do you think would be the most valuable concept that we could share with folks to think about applying in their own world?
When I think about innovation, my definition of innovation is relevance. And I think a lot of times we have so many ideas, and as entrepreneurs, we don't have a shortage of ideas. We just have a shortage of solutions that actually solve important problems for our customers. And so I think that's really the key, is to just, stop looking at yourself and what you can do. I mean, it's fine. You need to understand what you offer, but you really need to be market focused and understand what are the pain points in the market, and do anything and everything you can to solve the problems for your customers, and make sure that in the process, you are differentiating yourself from other solution providers. I'm always looking at what makes me special. Why would somebody do business with me? What can somebody get from me that they can't get from anyone else? And that to me is always an extremely important part of the process.
I totally love that. I often tell people, I said, listen, your distinction is all about what are you willing to say that others won't, don't, or are actually afraid to. Like the emperor has no clothes, or, innovation is BS, or, best practices are stupid, for example, which is another one of Steve's great books. So yes. Totally love that advice. That's brilliant. Now, how do people get connected and stay connected to more Steve Shapiro?
I think the easiest way is just go to steveshapiro.com. That will give you information on everything. What you won't see there are two things, though, that people may be interested in. One is innovation intervention, which is innovationintervention.com. And then the other one is the new book, which isn't coming out till 2020, but it's called Invisible Solutions. So if you go to invisiblesolutionsbook.com, you get to at least see a little preview of the book, and we'll keep on adding to it until it's officially out.
That sounds really intriguing.
Yeah.
Invisible Solutions. We're going to keep people on the edge of their seat. And we're going to, of course, link up all the goodies here in the show notes. So when people go to thespeakingshow.com, right under this episode, are going to be Steve's links, Steve's books, Steve on social media. You do the social media thing?
I do. I have to admit, I've sort of slowed down a little bit. I'll probably pick back up once we get the book done. The manuscript was just submitted and all that. But my best way to stay engaged with people is to actually have a conversation with people and talk to people who know me. I find social media, I just feel like I'm talking to an empty room. Even if people are listening, it feels empty to me.
Dude, I spend my whole life talking to empty rooms. You dialed my number right there.
That's awesome.
All right, my friend, you are fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. And we'll have to have you back. Maybe when the book comes out, we'll do a big book launch episode and talk about invisible solutions.
Sounds good. Scary music. You have to superimpose scary music right now. Woo!
Dun, dun, dun.
Thanks so much, David.
Thank you, buddy. Talk to you soon.
All right. Bye now.
Well, that wraps up another episode of The Speaking Show. Hey, tell you what, if you like us, rate us and review us on iTunes. Subscribe. Tell a friend. Go grab the notes and downloads and extras at thespeakingshow.com. See you next time.